Thank you very much, Stefan. It's a pleasure to be here. Colleagues, guests, invited travelers from overseas, Monsieur, Madame Rochefort. It's a pleasure to be here on many accounts. What I thought I would talk a little bit today is about biomass, introducing biomass, but from an architectural perspective. And two things, a few lessons learned along the way in the last few years. So by way of introduction, I'd like to pick up a few key points, not follow any formal process, but talk about Northern Ontario, issues in Northern Ontario, the process for integration in terms of architecture, a few lessons that we've learned. Stefan mentioned we're a Northern Ontario firm, successor firm to Critchley, Delane, Trussler, Evans, Bertrand, and are currently working on a couple of lead buildings on this particular campus, Student Center, the new library with colleague firms from the Toronto area. These are both lead buildings. I'll talk a little bit more about leads. But something to note, Lewis Mumford wrote this in 1924. The essential structure of the community, the home, the meeting place, the workplace, they remain. But the covering changes and passes, like the civilization itself, when new materials, new methods of work, new ideas, habits, and ways of feeling come into their own. That was almost perfect. Thank you very much for the setup, Mr. Rochefort. In terms of going full cycle, the institutions stay the same, but it's just the technologies change. So I mentioned to my father-in-law, Lionel Davidson, a couple of weeks ago. I was speaking here, and he's from Sturgeon, and he said, well, what's this biomass thing? And I started to explain, and in the 40s, he said, I bought his father owned a lumber mill, and he said, I bought this old boiler from the Morrison brothers, and he says, I used to heat my house. And he said I'd pull up this, his father owned a lumber mill, a truckload of sawdust, dump it in my basement, and it had a little motorized damper on it. And this thing would chug away. And he said I had 2 years of energy, free energy from my father's mill. So the good news story is this is not new technology. The first time I was exposed to biomass was at the age of 2 years old at my great-grandmother's house. And when I asked my parents, I said, well, what's she doing? She's cooking wood. And he says, no, she's just putting wood in the wood stove. That's how it heats. So I think it's too close to home for us. It's a technology that we're comfortable with. They had, and one of the drawbacks for that particular furnace, it just created too much dust. He went on and talked to me about local folklore in terms of, I mean, we use straw at construction sites to generate heat and keep things warm. And he even went so far as talking about potato peelings. If you put hay on them, just leave them there, they'll generate and germinate in the springtime. And residents in the area used to add oats in the bottom of their planting. And what does that have to do with biomass? Absolutely nothing, but I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to mention it today. So, but from an architectural perspective, there's a process that we actually go through, and it's very rigorous, very formal. First, there has to be a need in terms of a built environment. You have to create a core team, and you go through a very rigorous process. We choose from several energy sources. As an architect involved with multiple engineers and various consultants, we have really an arsenal to choose from, of which biomass is just one possibility. And it typically boils down to cost. Lesson learned, cost drives an awful lot of issues, as pointed out by my fellow colleagues. So it's important to, and that method of, once you have that source, how you deliver it's quite important, whether we use air, water, or metal to conduct that. So the architectural process, there are several various key points along the process. First is creating a core team. If you can, as a supplier or a person, be introduced, be involved, be part of the core team in some capacity, they're the decision makers. You have a client, appropriate stakeholders, an architect or a consultant, sub-consultants, typically mechanical, electrical, structural, landscape, civil engineers, interior designers, and specialty consultants ranging from lab consultants, acoustic on. The client as well will have their own sub-consultants of surveyors, soils engineers, hazmat studies, etc. Then you have to identify the various issues. First is a functional plan deal with the site, a budget, and time frames. So the site can be typically complex and has an impact specifically on biomass in terms of being able to deliver items to the site. We have to deal with solar angles, soils issues, providing services to the site. A functional plan is a descriptor of the various uses within a building in terms of the spaces, and of course the budget, timing, and task chart, tying it all together. The next point along our journey is usually choosing the method of delivery. So whether it be a stipulated sum, a design, build, finance model, design, build, cost plus, there's different methods of which to select a process to construct that work. Now I've highlighted, you can see by way of red dot, the start of the design process, and it would be at this point that if you were to be involved, you should get your dibs in to the process. As soon as is possible, the decision should be made to consider biomass as a fuel source because of the complexities, because of the obvious issues involved. And so at the conceptual stage, it's usually fairly loose. You come up with an idea or a concept, just some general strategy. From that, you start to create adjacency or bubble diagrams, how things relate and how things work. And part of that is the site issues. And then you get into schematic design. So at this point in time, a very key fundamental point if you are considering biomass, and because some of the major parameters, if you look, and really what drives a lot of architectural processes, one of my the good points and sometimes the bane of the work that we do are mechanical systems, anything with moving parts. Typically, mechanical systems account for 35 to 40% of your project, depending on the complexity of it. Electrical might be in the range of 10 to 15. Structural components, 10 to 12. When you add that up, there's not much left really for the interior finishes, paint colors, and all the other things as architects we get involved with. So lesson learned is mechanical is a major part of it. Decisions are usually made early on in terms of the type of energy source that are being done. So it's important when you're down into the contract documents, sometimes the horse has left the gate. When you're into schematic design, analyzing, for example, the floor-to-floor heights, might be a simple decision, but with current requirements for fresh air and the need for larger technologies and mechanical systems, just the establishment of floor-to-floor heights are an important element to get air moving within a building. Understanding how you get placement of mechanical systems on the site and how it all ties together. So mechanical being very important, electrical and structural. The next element in our process of design is detailed design. So really you see when we're starting to get into selecting elements and finishes, we've really, the major key decisions have been made, and we're into, it's pretty tough to kind of come back. So you'd be into detailed design, starting to analyze core elements. Then we're into contract documents. People often refer to them as blueprints or white prints today. You work through various, a multitude of elements, and finally get to delivery selection of, in a traditional sense, a general contractor. There are several different delivery methods available. Finally on to the construction process, and of course dealing with our northern climates. And working through a multitude of issues with warranties. So just, it's a very high level process, couple lessons learned. It's important. Major component of any of our work is mechanical, and trying to make those early decisions is absolutely critical important. So by way of case study, I'd like to share a few lessons learned from my perspective in terms of biomass. I'd like to highlight the North Bay Regional Health Centre. It's a project I've worked on since 1997. The largest greenfield construction project currently happening in Northern Ontario. I've been extremely blessed to be involved in this project, and it's garnished a little bit of world attention. We were asked to speak at the World Health Organization some 5-6 years ago as a representative of Canada. The 3 other countries were presenting, the UK and the US. And from that, we were invited back to speak for the Center of Healthcare Design in the US in Miami the following year. And I put this slide up there. It's because of trying to explain to people where we live. And it's really the core and the genesis of the design that is the North Bay Regional Health Centre. And it relates to Ontario, and Northern Ontario specifically, and I'm quite proud of it. It's a good news story. We were given the opportunity to design. I'm from the North. We're capable of anything. We can be visionaries. We can lead the world. We have led the world, and we're doing so today with this particular project. But what makes Northern Ontario unique? And it's our geography. Ontario is 1 million square kilometers, population of 13 million people. 8 to 9 million people live in Southern Ontario. That leaves 750,000 square kilometers for about 4 million people. If you take a look at Japan, for example, 120 million people in about 1/3 the land mass, quite dense. And if you take a look at Italy, for example, almost half of that area in 59 million people. So what does that say about us as Northerners? We're almost the inverse of the Caribbean. What do we have that makes us unique? We're islands, but with trees between us. And if you're in the biomass industry, what an opportunity. So we have a really interesting location with lots of trees around us. We have to be insular, we have to take care of one another, and in turn, we have very strong communities. And really that is the genesis for where we are today and the hospital that we designed. One of the guiding principles in terms of designing a hospital of the future, and this was actually in the year 2003, that it'd be community center and a lot of other wonderful things, but technologically savvy. And I'd like to show you how we did a few of those things. As I'd mentioned, it's a greenfield site located on the escarpment to the left of the screen up here in North Bay. It picks up a wonderful heritage that we have of the wood industry, First Nations culture, and real explorers and in our Northern Ontario landscape. The concept came about from trying to design 750,000 square feet, one go on a greenfield site. Pulling together two distinct corporate entities, and how was I going to do that? Along with my colleagues and various a multitude of consultants, harken back to my roots in Sturgeon Falls. Really, it was a small mill town, about 6,000 people, each had a bungalow. In essence, I was designing an entire Northern Ontario town. So from the structure and wayfinding elements, it had a town center, the circle. It had two main streets, one for each of the corporate groups, and from that the bones became the general hospital with patient pods on the south side and the Northeast Mental Health Center. So you can see the genesis for the design and some early sketches. It was at this point that, part of my lessons learned, we were using a traditional model of delivery, a stipulated sum, a tendered process. And at the time, we had considered the incorporation of a in this location here, the incorporation of a plant, a cogen plant. We had 28 different sites to look at. The site that was selected is 80 acres, and the building was built for future growth, has to be for 100% future growth in both directions. So we were really at a pinch point in terms of an escarpment to provide a cogen plant. As we proceeded through the project, you can see here current construction of where the cogen plant is scheduled to be located. And I'll back up to this in a moment, part of the process evolved. It changed from traditional process to a modified design, build, finance model of delivery, the first of its kind in Ontario. And one of the submissions from Plenary Health proposed biomass heating plant as part of the method of delivery, which is an excellent idea. However, their proposal at the time was to use wood waste from local industries, in essence, slash at the time. So back to my original lessons learned, the decisions were made earlier on with 750,000 square feet, $350 million of construction, and fairly complex integration of services. It's pretty tough to go back and integrate this. So going back to the issues that we had, there just physically was not enough space on the site to accommodate that type of a plant at that time. Since that time, the industry has changed dramatically in allowing for pelletization and various pucks. And it still becomes an issue in terms of getting to the site and delivering, whether it be a small physical plant or a large physical plant. Consequently, what we have done is created a building that is, and I'll back up a moment, is a LEED, will be a LEED certified building. I don't know if anyone's familiar with LEED, but in about 10 years ago, we started to incorporate LEED into the process, and it was intended to be the first LEED hospital in Canada by utilizing a holistic approach. So one thing we did do, utilizing the LEED approach, was to incorporate the ability for some flexibility in future growth. So it's intended to be, we've been eclipsed by Abbotsford because of a delay in delivery model that we're involved with, but we're shooting to be a certified building, quite complex for a hospital, and the potential just in terms of LEED, mechanical, physical cost savings of $800 and some thousand, annual cost savings, which parallels the work that you had pointed out, about $400,000 a year. That's without even the introduction of biomass. So you can see construction happening at the Regional Health Center, and you can see here, this is the location where the cogen plant is. And just to back up, and I won't go back to that slide, but the building was designed in such a fashion that all the mechanical systems in terms of the mechanical penthouse, which is located here on level 3, on level 4, are to allow us total flexibility to tie into either a cogen plant or any other method of providing a heat source to the building. So you can see the evolution of the Regional Health Center coming along, and some early computer modeling. This was done about 6-7 years ago, and actually where we are today. The current thinking at this point in time is a partnership with Nipissing First Nations, who will have the property immediately adjacent the Regional Health Center, and plan to provide both electricity and hot water, which is a heavy component of a hospital usage for steam, and that's the current plan. I was quite excited to hear the partnerships formed earlier today, so that may become a reality, and we can easily tie in and integrate into the plant. And so some lessons learned. Innovations, of course, being first. My skin has become quite thick. We've gotten beat up quite a bit over the years and learned an awful lot. And of course, being a first, you're always at the forefront of the challenges. We were halfway through design when SARS hit, so we've had to retool what we were doing, but because of flexible design, we're able to accommodate that. It's the first hospital in Canada that's 100% fresh air in every room. It's a world leader in a number of other areas. And in terms of being up front, we took on LEED as a method of looking at the building holistically, but it was still new in Canada. So we're now registered with the USGBC as our third-party provider, even before it existed in Canada. And one of the components in that was to provide for that flexibility to tie into alternate sources. So very quickly, my lessons learned: site selection is absolutely critical. It's like riding with any large project, surfing. If you're too far ahead of the wave, you get crushed. If you're behind the wave, you can never catch up. In this instance, the wave has gone through. Physically, to allow trucks to turn on the site in the pinch point that we have is rather difficult. So now we're looking to a partner adjacent, but we've made all of the mechanical systems flexible to tie in. So if you're planning facility, making sure you have a proper location and physical space. Integration of biomass as a philosophy early on in the systems. The major decisions, once they're made, are pretty tough to go back and to retool after the fact. So try and get in there early and get involved. And having sufficient or adequate storage and space for the physical plant. plant for storage and delivery, making sure flexibility, as we've witnessed, can go from wood on through to oil to gas and then eventually back to wood. So flexibility is paramount, and things will come back. I'm seeing a lot of buildings I'm working on that my partners have worked on 50 years ago, so it's interesting the lessons that we have to kind of pick up and learn from that past. And also long-term vision. What may be expensive today might change radically tomorrow. So consequently, from an architect's perspective, it's are pretty exciting times. It's a challenge that all of us can rise to quite easily. I think there's a lot of pioneering spirit that exists here in the room, and it's great to be part of it. So I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.